Hey, welcome to another episode of Inspirational Focus with Deacon Terry Acox, which he's going to be talking about the infancy narratives of from the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. So stay tuned. Welcome to another episode of Inspirational Focus. I'm with Deacon Terry Acox. He's a Catholic deacon with the Scioto County churches in the area in which he serves at the pleasure of the individuals in the churches as well as the priests. Deacon Terry, you've had a lot of experience in working with people, in particular in Scioto County at the 7 different churches, and it's always a pleasure talking with you.
It's a pleasure being here.
And I know that Christmas is coming up soon.
Yes, it is.
And you you've been developing some information on 2 Gospels, and that is with Luke and with Matthew. And you're going to be talking about the infancy narratives. What do you mean by that?
Basically, it's the story of Jesus from the time of his Annunciation until the time of his being found in the temple during the Holy Family's pilgrimage to Jerusalem.
I see. And specifically, you're looking at some of the genealogies.
Well, in part, yes,
Yeah.
because they are an important part of the background of Jesus and how he came to be known to the population at the time.
I see. Hey, and it's interesting. In one of the readings that we had, I think it was last Sunday, they went through some of the genealogy that Christ came from, and they sort of indicated that one of the individuals, came from Abraham.
The genealogy of Matthew that's presented in Matthew in the first chapter of Matthew starts with Abraham, and it is read each year at the vigil service for the Christmas vigil, and it begins with Abraham, and then the purpose behind beginning with Matthew's purpose in beginning with the Abraham is that he wants to bring forth the fact that the Jewish people are indeed the promised people of God, the covenant of God. So he starts from Abraham, and Abraham being the father of Isaac and the father of Jacob and so forth, all the way down to the end of the genealogy, which is Jesus himself, because he says that Joseph is the father, as was thought, of Jesus, who was born of Mary.
Now, it's interesting. When they went through, it's my understanding, how many different generations did it go through?
Well, Matthew's genealogy has 42 generations.
42. Wow. From Abraham
to Jesus. He begins with Abraham, and there's 14 generations leading from Abraham to David. Then there's 14 generations between David and the Babylonian exile. Then there's 14 generations between the Babylonian exile and Jesus.
Oh, okay.
3 groups of 14. Well, 14 is a multiple of 7.
Yeah.
And 7 is a number of perfection in the Bible.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting.
So it goes in groups of 7 between Abraham and Jesus.
Huh. And Abraham is considered the father of the
Jewish faith and also the father of the Christian faith that stems from Jesus.
I see. Now, where is Moses in this?
As you recall the Exodus, Moses led the Jewish people out of Israel, out of Egypt,
Okay.
through the Red Sea, toward the Promised Land.
I see.
Moses himself did not lead the people into the Promised Land. He died when they reached the Jordan River, but Joshua led the people in the Jewish people into the Promised Land.
I see. And so there is quite some history between Moses and Abraham.
Right.
And so Abraham, as you said, was the father of the Jewish faith.
Right. Maybe I've got my dates. Like I said, there were these 42 generations between Abraham and Jesus. But the interesting part is that there's 4 women mentioned during this genealogy.
So let me understand. It went something to the effect of Abraham, who had Jacob, when they went through the iteration of the generations, they went from father to son.
They went father to son. Abraham, the father of Isaac,
Okay.
the father of Jacob, and so on,
Okay.
down through Jesus.
And you're saying that there were 4 generations with significant women.
There were 4 of these, 4 generations that had women mentioned.
I see.
These women are Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and the wife of Uriah.
Now, the wife of Uriah, where have I heard about her?
The wife of Uriah is Bathsheba, who had an adulterous affair with King David.
Okay.
All right. Her son was Solomon, who is in the line of ancestry to Jesus.
I see. So David and then Solomon through Bathsheba.
Yes.
Okay.
And the interesting part of these 4 women, is that they were not Jewish.
Okay.
2 of them were Canaanites. Ruth was a Moabite, and Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. It doesn't mention her nationality, but Uriah was a Hittite.
Oh, okay. All right. Now, would you consider them Gentiles?
They would be considered Gentiles.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So, as father to son, etc., went down. It seems like from Abraham all the way to Jesus, the point that they wanted to make was that Jesus descended from Abraham?
Jesus was a descendant of Abraham.
Okay.
And these women are mentioned not in the direct line, but and I don't remember who their husbands were.
Okay.
Because they just mentioned the husbands as
Okay.
in the direct line. For example, it says David was the father of Solomon, whose mother was the wife of Uriah the Hittite.
I see. Well, it sort of explains that there, sometimes a child is only a woman, and consequently, in some faiths, that sort of breaks the genealogy. So I understand where the 4 women came in the fact that from Abraham down to Jesus, they can clearly show that he was of Jewish faith.
Right. But then the last woman mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus, according to Matthew, was the Blessed Virgin Mary. Now, she's included, it's felt one of the reasons why these women are mentioned, along with Mary, is it's felt that there is a unusual relationship between the woman and her husband.
Okay.
The 4 women, they had questionable relationships with her husband.
Okay.
For example, Bathsheba's adulterous affair with David. If we look at Rahab, she was a Canaanite, and it's felt that she was also a prostitute, but she helped some spies of the Jewish people during the seizure at Jericho.
Oh, okay.
By letting them down through the window.
Oh, okay.
And she was saved from the destruction of Jericho.
Oh, okay.
Because of that. But anyway, there was, like I said, there was an unusual relationship between these women and their husband.
Okay.
And we all know the relationship between Mary and her husband Joseph. Mary conceived Jesus through the Holy Spirit. She did not have relations with Joseph, but Joseph took Mary into his home, even though she was pregnant by the Holy Spirit. He didn't know this at first.
Sure.
And then he also was responsible for the Holy Family, the raising of Jesus through his childhood.
I see. Now, in the Old Testament, there's one book, the Book of Ruth. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so it's the same Ruth that you're talking about?
I honestly don't know, but I believe so.
Yeah, okay. And it's interesting that in the history from Abraham to Jesus, it's rich with a lot of spiritual guidance.
Spiritual guidance, symbolism. Yes. In fact, the mention of these 4 women is symbolic, like I said, because they did something which helped the genealogy, helped along through the path of the genealogy.
Very okay. Huh. Well, that's interesting. Now, you mentioned Luke and you mentioned Matthew.
Right.
I'm assuming that both Luke and Matthew have the same.
Not necessarily. They're not exactly the same. In fact, Luke's genealogy is worded somewhat differently.
Okay.
It actually starts with Jesus and goes backwards.
Okay.
Jesus, as was supposed the son of Joseph, who was the son of some Haley, and the son of so on, and it goes back that way.
Oh, okay.
All right. But Luke's genealogy goes all the way back to Adam, and it refers to Adam as the Son of God, because God created Adam.
I see. So in Luke's gospel, he's showing that Jesus was a descendant of Adam.
Jesus was a descendant of Adam,
and
as we all are.
Okay, sure. And Matthew just went to Abraham.
Matthew just went to Abraham.
I see.
Now, Matthew's purpose was that he was in conjunction with his being generally referred to as the gospel writer for the Jewish faith, Jewish people.
Oh, okay.
All right. He wanted to present the gospel to the Jewish people so that they might come to believe in Jesus Christ.
I see.
All right. Luke's purpose was, and that he was the writer of the gospel writer to the Gentile people. And so he goes all the way back to Adam, so that he can include all the people since Adam.
I see. Well, that makes an interesting thoughts in the fact that I would imagine that here we have 2 men, 2 gospel writers, and each one is looking at the group that they are dealing with and helping them to better understand Jesus.
Right. Like I said, they're writing to different audiences.
I see.
So they need to help put into their stories different facts that they acquire in order to present their truth to that particular part, that particular group of people.
I see. And so in the Christian faith, we have 4 individuals that wrote Gospels.
We have correct.
We have John, Matthew, Luke,
and Mark.
And so Matthew and Luke are significant in the fact that they are gearing their Gospels to not only the Jewish faith, but the Gentiles.
Right.
Okay.
And that's why they put their genealogies in the way that they did.
I see.
Even though there is there is some agreement, all right, especially if you look at the genealogies beginning around the time of Abraham. There is some agreement, but there's a lot of disagreement. For example, if you start with the genealogy starting with Jesus, it refers to Joseph as the supposed father of Jesus, but that they differ in who the father of Joseph was.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, and why the difference is there's no real good explanation for the differences, other than if you look at how history books are put together. Let's say you and I were going to write a history book.
It would be exactly the same.
And it could be on the same subject.
Yes.
But we're going to go to a lot of different sources.
That's true. Yeah,
And some of them will be the same, some of them will be different. We will pick out certain facts that we want to emphasize.
Yep.
In our history. That's what Matthew and Luke did. They went to their different sources, to whatever written records existed at the time, and they picked out the facts that they wanted in their particular story about this early part of Jesus' life.
Yeah, and I would imagine, since cell phones weren't around, since the internet was not around, they'd have to really dig deep.
There were, like I said, they addressed whatever written records they had.
I understand.
Matthew was an apostle of Jesus.
Okay.
Luke, if you read the beginning of his story, his gospel, he says that he went to find facts from people. So he basically interviewed people who were around Jesus at the time.
I see.
Conceivably, he even interviewed the Blessed Virgin Mary and got some information from her.
All right. That's interesting. And so when they put their gospels together, did they consult one another, Matthew, John, Luke?
No, they didn't. They worked separately.
Oh, okay.
The Gospels were written at different times. Both of them written in the period of time between the year 70 and the year 90.
I see.
We can't put exact dates on them, but they were both written in that period of time.
Right.
And they were written in different places. Different. Luke wrote his somewhat in Greece and Syria, and Matthew wrote his more in the Israel Promised Land region.
Now I know in the Catholic Church, I can't speak for some of the Protestants, but throughout the year, a selection of one of the gospel writers is used.
Right.
For instance, this particular year, right up to Advent, was it?
All right. Right now we're in what's called Year A.
Year A.
The beginning of Advent begins Year A in the Sunday lectionary.
Okay.
Most of the readings through this period of time will be from the Gospel of Matthew.
Okay.
Then Year B begins next Advent, and most of the readings there will come from the Gospel of Mark.
Huh.
Year C will begin the next Advent after that, which we just left prior to this Advent, and those readings come from the Gospel of Luke.
Hey, and what happened to John?
Well, John's kind of a special case. We will hear readings throughout all 3 of the years from the Gospel of John, especially during the Lenten season.
Oh, okay. All right. So John is used for those, and I know that each one of the Gospels has its important relevance to the specific time periods of throughout. But John, I think, if I'm understanding this correctly, specifies specific things during those special occasions, like Lent. And yeah,
John, like I said, John is written or read primarily through the season of Advent, although there are other places through the liturgical year.
I see.
The passages from the Gospel of John are read. And also there's the daily Mass schedules, or lectionary readings,
I see.
which are different than
Yeah.
the Sunday lectionary readings.
Well, it is interesting. You know, someone once asked me, do we as Catholics follow the Bible? And that individual came from a very conservative religion, and I had indicated that we have 3 readings at each Mass. And would you like to share, you know, what each one of those readings sort of give an overview?
Through the normal Sunday lectionary, outside of the Lenten season and the Easter season, we will hear readings from the Old Testament.
That's the first reading.
The first reading, and we will hear readings from the New Testament, outside of the Gospels, the letters of Paul, the Acts of the Apostles, and so forth. That will be the second reading.
Okay.
And then every Sunday we will have a Gospel reading from either Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John.
Okay. So in essence, we have 3 different readings. And then something I've always wanted to know, and I hope I don't put you on the spot here, but when you give your sermons, you know, as a deacon, you have been ordained to...
I've been given the faculties to give a homily.
Yes. Do you try to incorporate all 3 of the readings, or do you look at one of the readings and sort of expound upon it?
I personally tend to look at the Gospel reading and expound upon that.
I see. Okay.
It's just me. You know, a lot of priests and other deacons, they will try to incorporate all 3 of the readings. A lot of them take an idea from one of the readings and expound on that and that type of thing.
Okay.
But personally, I tend to stick with the Gospel itself.
I see. Okay. So you have that latitude.
Yes.
Okay.
There are no specific instructions on what to preach about in a homily.
All right. Getting back to Matthew, I digressed a little bit, sorry. But
to Matthew and Luke?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, both of the Gospels in the infancy of Jesus mentioned John the Baptist. Now, as we know, after the Annunciation, Mary goes to the house of Elizabeth, who is the mother of John the Baptist.
Oh, okay. All right.
All right. And Mary and Elizabeth are women, basically cousins.
Yeah.
So John the Baptist is actually a blood relative of Jesus through Mary and Elizabeth. Okay. Now there are some similarities between the birth of John the Baptist and Jesus. For example, an angel appears to Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, and an angel appears to Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Okay.
All right. The angel says to Zechariah and to Mary that there will be a son involved. Zechariah says, okay, but he doubts the word of the angel. And as a result, he suffers a punishment, if you will. He is struck dumb, actually. He cannot speak from that point until the birth of John the Baptist.
Oh, I see.
Mary does not doubt, but she questions just how can this happen since I've not known man.
Yeah.
And the angel tells her that God, the Holy Spirit, will come upon her and she will conceive. And Mary says, be it done to me according to your word. Whereas Zechariah kind of doubts the whole situation. He says, I'm an old man, my wife's an older woman, and we can't conceive, so how in the world are you going to do this? Right. Both of them were told, do not be afraid. Mary says, okay, be it done unto me according to your word. Mary's response does not leave any room for doubt. She says yes right away. And then Matthew and Luke go on to both bring Jesus in to meet John the Baptist, if you will, at the River Jordan for the baptism of Jesus. During both of these times, then, at both of these times, John the Baptist goes out into the desert.
Okay.
And then comes into the baptism of Jesus. Jesus is baptized, and then he goes into the desert to be tempted.
I see. Okay. Huh.
So there's a lot of similarities. The angel's response to both of them is similar too. Says this will happen because with God all things are possible.
Now, did the other two gospel writers, John and Mark, did they go in depth into the genealogy of?
They had no mention of the genealogy of Jesus as far as the human perspective.
I see.
John does mention in his prologue that the Word was God, was with God, and is God, and so forth. So he clearly states that Jesus comes from God as the Son of God.
I see. So I think it was very important that they both wanted to make sure individuals understood that Jesus was a direct descendant of Abraham. And of Adam. Huh. It's interesting. We only have a minute or so left. So, final thoughts?
Okay. Like I said earlier, Matthew was the gospel writer to the Jewish people, and Luke is the gospel writer to the Gentiles. But this does not mutually exclude them from each other, because if you go back to the time before the Babylonian exile, the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom were dispersed among the Babylonians, and basically the tribe itself was destroyed because they were spread so far and wide.
So there were 12 tribes.
There were 12 tribes originally.
And 10 were in the northern part.
10 were in the northern part.
And when the Babylonians conquered the Jewish...
the northern kingdom. They dispersed the Jewish people among them. Now, one purpose of Luke's gospel, and going back all the way to Adam, is to include those lost tribes.
Oh, okay.
And he wants to bring them all back together.
I see.
And so in order to do that, he has to go back to this period of time, include the Gentiles within the...
Well, when we're looking at the gospel, sometime in the near future, I'd like to talk about the Old Testament and some of the origins.
Okay.
Terry, it's always a pleasure being able to talk with you, and you provide a lot of relevant information, and I want to thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
I'm Patrick Dengel. This has been an episode of Inspirational Focus with Deacon Terry Acox. We thank you for listening and viewing.